Hi, welcome back. Today I'm here with my Nonfiction November wrap-up. In the month of November, there was a readathon hosted by Olive over at A Book Olive. I will link her channel down below if you want to check her out. And it's basically just about getting people to read more nonfiction. I participated this year and it was definitely a success. If you saw my TBR video, you might know that I had 4 books on my TBR, and I did read 4 nonfiction books this month. Only 2 of them were on my TBR, but you know, I'm actually pretty happy with it, and all of the books that I read were really great. So let's talk about the 4 books I read. One of the books that I read was an audiobook from my library. One of them was a physical book from my library. Excuse the children in the background. And 2 of them are physical books that I own. And I've got to tell you, this was definitely a success. One of these was 4 stars and the other 3 were all 5-star reads for me, guys. So yeah, this worked out really, really well. So first I'll start with my 4-star read. It was still really, really good. This is Code Girls, The Untold Story of the American Women Codebreakers of World War II by Liza Mundy. And this was actually sent to me by #books. They had reached out to me a while back and asked if I'd be interested in a copy, and I said yes, because it sounds super interesting. And I'm really happy that I picked it up. It's fascinating material. Until recently, a lot of this information was kept classified, and actually in the process of writing this book, she was part of who brought some of this information to light that had been classified up till now. It is amazing. This untold story, literally, of all of these thousands and thousands of women in America during World War II who were working as codebreakers and were doing really important work that they just haven't really gotten credit for. And so she's bringing their stories to light. She's talking about the different ways that they impacted the war, women who were working as codebreakers for the Army, women who were working as codebreakers for the Navy. This was the time period when women were actually able to enlist in the military for the very first time, which is pretty interesting. Initially, when they brought them on, they were all as civilian contract employees. And as the war went on, eventually, even though it was very controversial, they were able to enlist as female. They were actually able to enlist in the military. So it's a really interesting story. It follows multiple women and multiple accounts of various things. I hope somebody takes some of this and makes it into a movie or multiple movies, because there's so much in here that I feel like should be more widely known. It's a really cool book. It's very interesting. One thing I will say about it is the pacing is mixed. So if I were to do this over again, I might recommend doing it in an audio format. I think that would help with it if you like audiobooks. Regardless, I think it's definitely worth picking up. Some portions of the book flow really well and are very easy to read. There are other portions of it that feel a bit more academic. Hey, honey. Hi. What's in your mouth? Ugh. Hey, look. Can you say hi? Say hi. Hi. Did you get a
Hello.
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 All right. Bye, honey. Love you. Go see Daddy. Go play. Bye, Conrad.
But I already have the sweater on.
Go put a coat on. It's cold out. Thank you.
Sweaters don't make you cold.
Conrad, it's very cold. Go put a coat on.
It's not. Daddy, do I need to put a coat on?
Do we need to put a coat on? Yes. They're going to the park. Okay, so Code Girls. So there are portions of this that read a little slower and a little more academic, so I think that doing this via audiobook would help take care of that and help it to just kind of have a more consistent flow. Regardless though, I do think it is very much worth picking up. It is fascinating material and it's a story that deserves to be told. So I definitely recommend this one. I did give it 4 stars, and thank you so much to #, for sending me a copy. I am glad that I picked this one up. Next up, the first of my 5-star reads is one that I actually own, and this is Hunger by Roxane Gay. This book. Roxane Gay is, I think, an amazing writer. This is one of her nonfiction works. She also writes fiction, and reading this I think is cementing her as a favorite author for me. I definitely will read more from her. Earlier in the year, I read a collection of short stories called Aidi by her, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. This was also a 5-star read, and I just think it's fantastic. Hunger is a memoir of sorts. She calls it a memoir of my body. She talks about a lot of things in this book, but it's about what it's like to be a very, very large person in America. And she talks even in the beginning of the book about the fact that she's saying, no, this is not just like slightly overweight or what she calls Lane Bryant fat, where you can fit into Lane Bryant sizes, which go up to size 26, but beyond that. She says that at her heaviest, she weighed 577 pounds, and yeah, it's a lot, and it's really interesting. It's very raw, the way she talks about it, and the thing is, one thing I will say, just so that you're aware that this is in there, but she can trace a lot of this back to when she was 12 years old, and she was brutally raped by a group of boys and never told anybody about it until she was an adult. And that after that, food became a source of comfort, but also putting on weight became a means of trying to protect herself and have control over what was happening with her body. And she talks about that and talks about the psychological pieces of it and other things that happen through her life of growing up, and where she's slowly coming to terms with things and trying to figure that out. And also the ways in which people of size face a lot of everyday degradation and prejudice by people around them. So I very, very much recommend it. I think it is a powerful book, and I applaud her for being so vulnerable in this book. And so yeah, anyway, highly recommend it. Hunger, A Memoir of My Body by Roxane Gay. It's very, very good. The next book that I want to talk about is the audiobook that I listened to, and this was a recommendation from my friend Mara over at Books Like Whoa. I wasn't sure if I would get it in November because I had been on a waiting list for the audiobook from my library, but it did come in, so I listened to it and highly recommend it. It's called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski, and it is a book about female sexuality. Highly recommend this for anyone who is a woman, has sex with women, or anybody who cares about the way that we think about rape culture. It is an important and powerful book, and for those who are worried about this, it is largely science-based. The author of the book does have a PhD in human sexuality. She works as a sex educator, and she really integrates the latest science and research into her discussions of female sexuality. It's so good. It is fascinating. It's really helpful. I wish that I had it 15 years ago. Some of the things that she talks about in the book are things that I have figured out over the years, but I wish I had known them as a teenager because it would have saved me a lot of like heartache and confusion. And then there were things that were really useful even now. So I think whether you are young, whether you're older, whether you're single, whether you're in a long-term committed relationship, this is definitely one that is worth picking up. And it's just very thought-provoking and eye-opening. I think it's really good. The audiobook is great. It is actually read by the author herself. And if you guys are interested in getting a snapshot of some of what she talks about, she actually has a couple of TED Talks. I'll link one of them down below that I think is great. And the reason I think this one in particular is worth reading, and why I say that this is a good book for people who care about conceptualizing rape culture, is something she talks about that we're finding through research that is, I think, really, really fascinating, is that in many cases for women, there is a mismatch between their physical genital response to something and their internal enjoyment of something, or even their desire for something. That's really interesting. They did some research on this, and they found that this is less true for men, but still true. 50% of the time, men have a match between genital response and internal desire, whereas in women, it's only 10% of the time. And so this becomes a really big issue when you think about this thing of people saying like, oh, well, your words say no, but your body says yes, that is a problem and it is incorrect. And so I think if you're interested in knowing more about that and the science behind it, where no, your words need to say yes and consent is a really important factor, this is a good book to pick up. I also think that the biggest takeaway that she wants you to get from this book that I think is a powerful thing is, for so many women, they come in with X, Y, and Z thing and say, is it normal? And she really shows you that in almost every case, the answer is yes. Yes, it is normal. Normal, like, we're all sort of normal. We're all made up of the same parts arranged in different ways. And there's just really powerful information in this book. One of the other things that I think is really useful to think about and really interesting is the dual control model of desire and sexuality, which I think is really interesting. But what they found is that there are actually two different places in the brain that control the ways that we respond sexually and desire and other stuff as well, but in the context of this book, that's what she talks about. One of them you can imagine as being the brakes, and the other one you can imagine as being the accelerator. And both of those work in conjunction with each other, and every individual has different degrees of sensitivity to their brakes or their accelerator. So that's going to affect a lot of stuff, and it's a good thing to know about yourself. A good thing to know about a partner is how those things work for you, especially as a woman. So somebody might have really sensitive brakes where like any little thing that's off might be like, whoa, I am not interested, versus somebody might have a really sensitive accelerator where things get them going really easily. Most people fall in the middle on both of these things, but they still work in conjunction with each other. And she also talks about the ways that stress and chronic stress can affect those and how to effectively deal with the release of stress in your life. So anyway, highly recommend it. There's like a snapshot of some of the stuff you get in the book. It's a really easy read. It's really interesting. It's great on audio. I kind of think everybody should read it because it's worth knowing, and it's also just really practical, and she has like things to think through and worksheets and stuff if you're interested in that, which you can find on her website for free if you are listening to the audiobook. So yeah, highly recommend that one. Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. The final book that I read for Nonfiction November, I actually just finished a couple of days ago, and I basically read it all in one day. I couldn't put it down. I can't remember now who it was that recommended it to me, but I heard someone talking about it on BookTube and thought, that sounds fascinating. Let me request that for my library, and I'm so glad I did. This is another 5-star read. It's called All You Can Ever Know by Nicole Chung. And this is a memoir about transracial adoption. And again, I think it is something that a lot of people should probably read. It's really powerful. It's really compelling. I just couldn't stop reading it until I got to the end of it. So she writes about her experience as a Korean American being adopted by a white family, being raised in a rural, mostly white town, and the complexities that come with that. And even being raised by a really wonderful, loving, adoptive family, the racism that she faced at school and in society, and the ways that she struggled with thinking about her own identity. And then in some ways it's also a book about motherhood. She talks about her childhood and growing up, but then she also talks about how as an adult, when she was pregnant and getting ready to have her own child, she made the decision to seek out her birth family, and what that was like and what came of it, the positives and the negatives, the things that weren't what she had hoped for and the things that were better than she might have imagined, and the ways that we think about identity and what is lost in adoptions even when there's something gained. And so I think it's just very nuanced. It's really well done. It's really worth reading. I think it is a beautifully written book. It's not that long either. It's just over 200 pages long, 220 something I want to say, and so compelling. The other thing that she talks about and explores that I think is really worth considering is the way that we conceptualize adoptees, that frequently, especially in the past, I think maybe some of this is changing a little bit, but they're often treated as objects for the adoptive parents to save, to acquire, rather than treating them as their own humans with agency, with will, with their own past and history and identity. And that can become a problem, and she really kind of dives into that in a way that's really nuanced, and yeah, highly recommend it. So that one was also 5 stars. I loved it, and I think people should definitely read that as well. So there you go. I don't remember what all of the challenges were. 2 of these books were on my TBR and definitely did meet those challenges. Maybe I could find a way for the other ones to meet it. I'm not going to worry too much about it. All I'm going to say is Nonfiction November was definitely a success. 4 nonfiction books in a month is for sure more than I typically read, and all of them were so good, and I'm so glad that I picked them up. So talk to me in the comments down below and let me know any of your thoughts if you guys have read any of these. And question of the day, what is a great nonfiction book that you either have read or want to read? Let me know if you guys have read any of the books that I talked about here, or if you would be interested in reading any of them. I look forward to conversation. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.